Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our program. My name is Lorraine Browning, and I'm your moderator for this Ortho On Demand session. I'm the Clinical Science Liaison for Transfusion Medicine at Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, and previously had the pleasure of working with our speaker, Mike Roth, and his team during their adoption of Ortho Connect. Ortho Connect is a robust middleware solution that delivers one connection and complete control because it creates a seamless flow of information that centralizes blood bank management activities across multiple instruments and labs, from remote monitoring to menu and rule configuration to workflow management and quality control. Through a single cost-effective and scalable solution allowing you to confidently control your operations, trust your results, and optimize your staffing resources to meet the challenges of today and prepare for the challenges of tomorrow. Our speaker today is Mike Roth, Laboratory Administrative Director at St. Joseph's Hospital in Colorado, where he has led change across the lab in the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth, or SCL network, to meet the changing healthcare landscape and improve efficiencies to deliver high-quality patient care. This follows a 30-plus-year career in the United States Navy, which included leading the implementation of several automated systems across hospital labs, and developed his philosophy to use technology to work for the lab and empower the technologists to focus on patient care. Mike led the process at St. Joseph's Hospital as the first U.S. site to select and implement Ortho Connect paired with the Ortho Vision in 2018. Today, Mike will share their journey. As with any journey, there were challenges and learnings. He will describe how he led change and adoption across the integrated network of 8 hospitals and their remarkable results achieved to date. One last note before we get started. The presentation lasts about 25 minutes and will be followed by a Q&A session. We will now begin the presentation.
Good evening. My name is Mike Roth. I am the Laboratory Administrative Director at SCL St. Joseph Hospital in Denver, Colorado. Tonight I'll be talking about improving workflow through data control. I want to begin with thanking Ortho Diagnostics for inviting me to speak with them for them tonight. So a little bit about SCL Health. SCL Health is a small faith-based healthcare organization. We have 8 hospitals and over 100 physician clinics that are spread out through Colorado, Kansas, and Montana. At St. Joseph Hospital, I am the Laboratory Administrative Director. We are a 360-bed level 4 trauma facility who specializes in cardiac surgery, cardiovascular care, obstetrics, and NICU. Our laboratory performs over 870,000 tests each year. Our phlebotomy team collects over 100,000 venipunctures each year, and our transfusion services performs over 9,200 product transfusions annually. Within SCL, we have a corporate charge. Our corporate charge is that healthcare will continue to transform at a swift pace for the foreseeable future, and through thoughtful and disciplined preparedness, we will be ready. And what that means is that for SCL, we have determined that we have a 5-year plan. We are calling it Mission Vision 2025. And some key takeaways from that plan are that we understand that we cannot just sit around waiting for healthcare to make the next change. We have to be proactive, being aware of market changes and market influences, and be prepared for the next change. Otherwise, we may be caught unprepared and have to make a decision that is less than desirable for our strategic outcome. Another key element is that we need to reduce our duplication so that we can maximize our resources and consolidate services in efforts to conserve spending. So to meet that Mission 2025 plan, I needed to figure out a way to transform our laboratory. I needed to find the opportunities that are out there in the market today and see what we can do to make technology work for us. So if you ask my wife, who has recently just bought a new car, this is very similar to buying a new car. We basically went 10 years before moving to a new blood bank analyzer. And what was on the market 10 years ago is not what's on the market today. So what are we looking for? Well, my wife wanted Bluetooth, she wanted GPS, she wanted satellite radio, she wanted the electric seats, she wanted all of that. Okay, similarly, within the lab, we want to look at what is out there in this year's laboratory models that are out in the market. We needed a laboratory application that was going to reduce our manual processes, simplify our quality control, and allow us to centralize our skilled labor force. And what we found within Ortho Connect. Ortho Connect links our lab analyzers to our LIS. It links our laboratories together, and it actually links our hospitals together. So Ortho Connect as an application is driving us forward into the future. So our first step in our transformation was to move testing from a manual to an automated platform. In our current blood bank, we only perform type and screens automated. And even then, it was not all of them. Our current instrumentation was not able to keep up with our current workload. During busy times, type and screens would be split between a manual process and an automated process. So if you could imagine performing over 75,000 tests annually, with the majority of that being done manually with test tubes. Additionally, our normal workflow was between 4 and 6 antibody identification panels daily, which means about an hour per panel, almost a full FTE, just spending time working on antibody identification panels. So then we moved to Ortho. We get the Ortho Vision Analyzer, and where are we at now? Well, we have now automated our type and screens, and in addition to that, we have added our unit retypes, our DAT samples, our cord bloods, our AHG cross matches, and all those pesky antibody identification panels are now on the analyzer. What this has done for us is has allowed us to free up our technicians to be able to focus on the more advanced technical work while the analyzer is working for us doing the more common routine work. So our next areas of focus after that was to look at quality control, staffing, and process improvement. Our quality control program as it existed was pretty clunky. We had 9 instruments spread across 8 hospitals. Each instrument had to be managed independently. That meant you had to perform quality control, maintenance, new lot number, had to be all built, each site, each analyzer. At St. Joseph, our workload for QC was approximately 45 minutes a day. And what that did, it took a technician away from the bench from other work while they were doing quality control. Within that quality control, they had to reload the analyzers, they would run the reports, print out the reports, review them, and then have to file them away. As you can see from our slide here, in addition to these storage of reports, we had to keep paper records on hand for at least 2 years, and then after that we'd pay to send off to a repository. These photos in this slide are actually this year's, only 9 months worth of quality control records for our blood bank. Then we needed to look at staffing. Common to all of us is that there's a shortage of medical technologists and technicians across the nation. In the Denver area, this is no different. We are currently experiencing a large growth over the last 5 years in that the healthcare industry is booming in Denver. There are new hospitals and clinics popping up all across the metropolitan area. What that has done for us, unfortunately, is there's so many opportunities for technicians that it's hard to retain qualified staff. I've lost technicians recently for a variety of reasons. Some of them for shorter drives, some of them for better hours, a lot of them for higher pay. 2 of my technicians recently were wooed away by a competing organization. One received $6 more an hour and another received $10 more an hour. That is almost impossible for me to compete with that. Within that, I have such a high turnover rate that I'm currently budgeting in my personnel budget to have at least 1 of every technician be in some level of orientation throughout the year. Another thing we're running into is our workload and workflow. Because of the fact that we were doing so much testing manually on the bench, we were relying on our reference laboratory at the blood supply center to perform a lot of our advanced testing. My budget consisted of 6% of my budget was just nothing but reference laboratory testing. So before Ortho Connect, we relied heavily on outsourcing our advanced testing. A majority of it would go to our donor, our blood supplier, where the reference laboratory performed testing for us. The total amount we were spending was about 6% of our annual budget was going off to the reference laboratory. The other thing we were looking at was standardization. We had a lot of processes in place that were very rigid and singular in action. For example, we would have one tech, one sample. That meant that technician received that sample from when it arrived in the laboratory until the result was completed later on. Within that time frame, they very rarely would take on another sample. We also have a lot of redundancies in how our processes are done. Each site, 8 hospitals, as we mentioned, they each have their own procedures, they have their own policies. This then created a much larger amount of paperwork. A recent audit of our policy control system showed that we have over 2,500 documents across our 8 laboratories. Our system chief medical officer has recently challenged us to reduce that number. So how did Ortho Connect help us transform our laboratory? Well, certainly it transforms our quality control process. Ortho Connect is set up for us in a centralized database, and there's a single database administrator. So when a new lot number of quality control is released, that database administrator builds the lot number of quality control, takes them about 5 minutes each month, and once that is done, it is ready for all analyzers across all sites. Now the technician that we had spending 45 minutes a day working on quality control can now just go to the analyzer, load the samples, the analyzer communicates with Ortho Connect, and the samples auto-run, auto-file, and auto-store. Another plus is that while the quality control is running, we can continue to run the vision for patient testing. As you can see here, there's our picture of our paper records, and we've gone from paper records to a small thumb drive. Another thing that we are not doing at the moment, but who knows what we might consider in the future, is that we could actually have one central person monitor all 9 analyzers at one site. Certainly we're not doing it now, but it's an appealing thought to have quality control being monitored centrally. So how did Ortho Connect help us maximize our resources? Well, one thing we were able to do is we were able to look at our staffing matrix. We already mentioned that we're having a hard time finding qualified technicians and technologists. And so what we were able to do was, using Ortho Connect, we were able to allow our lab assistants to start using the analyzer to load samples. Within Ortho Connect, there is a security feature that we can program and custom for our own use. And we built a lab assistant within there. And what it allows them to do, it allows them to load the analyzer, but they cannot release results or review results. So that alone, again, gives us more freedom for our technicians to now work on the bench on this more advanced testing. The other thing being that it's a centralized server, the smaller hospitals within our organization can now draw upon the resources of our larger hospitals. We only have about less than 10 SPBs across our system. What we don't have is that a technical expertise at each site. And so what we can do with Ortho Connect is you can go in and help another site, draw upon their SPB, can look at their results while it's in. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was on the phone with one of our sites in Montana, which is 554 miles away from Denver. I was on the phone with the technician. I was looking at Ortho Connect. She was looking at Ortho Connect. And between the two of us, we were able to look at those reactions. I could see exactly what she's seeing. And I was able to provide advice to her on what's the next step in testing that sample. Okay, so now because of our techs have now been freed up from manual testing, we now have increased testing capacity to be able to take on that more advanced technical work, which then is going to secondarily reduce our need to rely on the reference laboratory. The other thing, Ortho Connect, we have automation rules. They have been accepted across all of our sites, so they're in place, standardized across all of our hospitals, and that again helps us achieve standard consistency. So as you can see from the slide here, we have had to change how we use our people, our processes, and our technology to help transform our laboratory, and within the center of all that is Ortho Connect. So as a car analogy we talked about earlier, we looked at the new technology that was out there, we looked at the features we had out there available to us, and we're now taking advantage of those features to drive our transformation. So how did we make this journey? Well, first thing, none of this was easy. It was certainly not all rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. And I don't know what it is about you blood bankers, but you are some of the toughest people to change the way you're doing business. We had huge trust issues we needed to overcome. We ran into questions about how can you use auto-releasing of results, manual testing is always better than automation, and why would you want to bring in this new technology and rely on a machine when people are always better? And if you look at the graphic that's on this slide, it truly represents what we ran into. On one view, you may look at that graphic and say, I am having to push these people into the 21st century. On the flip side, you could look at it and say, they're just trying to push me out the door. So who's doing the pushing and who's doing the pulling? But that's truly what we ran into with this. It is a new solution for our blood banks, and we had to gain their trust. Blood bankers, apparently, you guys are all skeptical of new things. And so we had to go and be able to change that paradigm within our blood bank. And we had to be realistic that we were taking on a new technology, being the first hospital and the first medical system in the United States to bring on Ortho Connect, that we were going to run into some new challenges, and we were going to face these challenges and having to figure out ways to overcome them and meet them. So within our strategy of bringing on Ortho Connect, it was key part of it was we had to have a hands-on approach. We needed to demonstrate to our staff that how the system worked and lead by example. We needed to listen to their concerns, and we need to be responsive to their concerns, and we need to be responsive to their concerns quickly. And we needed to be responsive thoroughly. And when that wasn't enough, we needed to take it to the next level and either do a one-on-one with the place. Sometimes a one-on-one was face-to-face, sometimes it was through a WebEx. As again, our hospitals are spread out through Kansas and Colorado and Montana. And then we had the communication piece with Ortho. We had to have a relationship with them. Ortho was there for us throughout the process. This was not an application that they sold us and then they left. They were there for us throughout the implementation process. We had bi-weekly meetings throughout the entire process. When questions arose or problems existed that we were not able to handle on our own, Ortho was there available via cell phone or email. But the one thing is, this was truly a shared relationship. It was an equal partnership. Ortho was there for us. They viewed us as equals. We viewed them as equals. Nothing that we said was viewed as subpar or anything. And we worked together to implement this together. And there were a lot of surveys done, a lot of questionnaires done, and information that we gave as input is being taken, and we'll hopefully see that in a future software upgrade. So what sort of lessons did we learn? Paramount to the project is we needed a project champion. And your project champion is not somebody who's just going to have a fancy title. They need to be somebody who's going to embrace the role. If they have a background in LIS and electronic medical records and blood banking, that's going to certainly be a plus. And they're going to act as your Ortho Connect expert. They need to be fully committed to mastering the software. They need to learn what all the features are and see how you can use those features within your lab. And they need to go and work with your team and bring that to them and show them how it works. And you also have to have your IT team involved. Not only getting it off the ground, but you're going to need them forever. As long as you have Ortho Connect, you need your IT team's going to need to be there to help you manage the software, the hardware, and sometimes having that call center in the middle of the night. So what are our next steps? So as we said, Ortho Connect helped us transform our blood bank. We made it imperative that we need to be proactive to meet our technology available, position ourselves for the future. That's meeting our system goals of Mission 2025. We are making the most of the resources that are available to us to avoid duplication and consolidation of workload. And recently, new information for us is that our organization has now decided that we're going to go through a core lab concept, which means with the 4 hospitals that we have in the Denver metro area, St. Joseph Hospital is going to be identified as the core lab for those areas, who will then start sending routine laboratory testing to us. Ortho Connect helps us by positioning us to move forward with that core lab concept. Okay, our next steps. At SCL, we're still transforming at a very fast pace, and 2020 is going to be even faster than 2019. Some of the projects we already have lined up for us is we're going to be bringing in an inventory of antigen type units. We want to reduce our reliance on our reference laboratory. So we're going to take that availability where the analyzer and Ortho Connect has freed up our technicians to now bring on a new option of having antigen type units as an available inventory in stock. We're going to be putting a new LIS online in April of 2020. We're going to be upgrading our current blood bank software in summer of 2020. And we're certainly hoping to adopt the next version of Ortho Connect. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing your experience with us. I can say it was truly an honor partnering with you and your team throughout this process. We're now going to move into the interactive Q&A portion of our presentation. As a reminder, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for Mike, please submit to all panelists in the chat, and we will address them now. I see that we have had some questions come in. So, Mike, after adopting Ortho Connect, is there anything your labs are able to do that you couldn't do previously?
Yes. Thanks for inviting me back again to speak. But what we've been able to do now is we've been able to change up a lot of our workflows and reuse our people in a different way than we were before. We've been actually, if you look at earlier in the slide, if you remember, we referenced that prior to having the Vision and Ortho Connect, we only had type and screens as an automated test. We now have our cord bloods, our titrations are something we're working on now. We're doing a lot of our antibody identification panels, our DAT panels, our unit retypes are being done, all on the Vision and Ortho Connect. And Ortho Connect being linked to our LIS means these results are going directly into the LIS result fields, and it's been able to allow us to restructure how we're staffing our blood bank.
Can you expand on how you're restructuring your staffing?
Yes. What we've been able to do is by putting the testing on the Vision and Ortho Connect, we have been able to take what we would consider the more routine work, the tube testing, the retyping, the busy work, if you say, from the bench and moved it to automation, which now leaves our techs freer to work on the more complicated part of blood banking, such as the interpretation of antibody identification panels, warm autos, cold auto antibodies, those more extensive workups that in the past required us to send out to a reference laboratory because we didn't have the time available to us because of all the other routine work that we were doing.
Okay, great, thanks. Given the current climate in the healthcare and any changes in your lab, have you been able to use Ortho Connect to streamline?
Oh yeah, like everybody else, we're being challenged with trying to find ways to downstaff during this COVID crisis and to keep our overhead costs down as low as we can. What we've been doing for the last 8 weeks in our blood bank is in tandem with the operating rooms not using as much patient casework, but we've been staffing our blood bank at our weekend levels. Again, with the way the Ortho Connect works is a technician can really just put a lot of the instrumentation, they can put the samples on the instrument and run that for them. And with the business rules we've got written into Ortho Connect, if it passes our set rules and parameters, it'll auto drop to the LIS and the results will go out that way. And we don't have to have the technician doing all the other work manually. So it's been a real freedom for us in the fact that we've been challenged to keep staffing levels down, but also able to continue carrying the workload that we've been doing.
Great. So regarding the pathologist, how involved were the pathologists in the decisions surrounding Ortho Connect and the rules being set up?
We have what we call a best practice teams within our organization. So we have that, and we have one that's just set up with transfusion medicine, and within our transfusion medicine best practice teams, we have 3 of our pathologists on those teams. And so when anything that was talked about as far as Ortho Connect and what rules were done, it was done as part of the team collaborative with those pathologists on those calls to agree to or lend input as they felt was necessary.
Right. Regarding implementation, did you implement Ortho Connect and your vision simultaneously? If so, how was that experience, and did you go live with both at the same time?
We did do the implementation with the Vision and Ortho Connect at the same time. It was a little bumpy at the beginning, and I'll say that for all of us, it was a little bit with both Ortho and with us, because as the Vision, we were learning the Ortho Connect together as we were trying to put the Vision online, and I think it was a learning curve for both St. Joseph and for Ortho at that time as we brought the Ortho Connect up. But once we got everything up and going, I think it was actually better after the fact that we tried to bring them both online at the same time, because otherwise we had to rethink how we would use the Vision if we used it as a standalone analyzer, and then switching over to Ortho Connect and using those business rules there.
You previously mentioned 6% of your budget was dedicated to send out. Was check time the driving factor, and have you seen an improvement since standardizing?
Yes, this goes back to that workflow we were talking about. We have, like I said, I would probably estimate 80% of our routine work that we were doing before. So I'm talking about things like cord blood testing, ABO retyping of units, antibody identification panels, DAT testing were all being done manually and on the bench. We switched that over to the Vision, and now we can do that antigen typing in-house. In the past, if I had a patient who came in with a positive antibody and I needed to find an antigen negative unit, depending on the time of the day and what we're staffed as, we may refer that work to the reference laboratory requesting antigen typed units and cross-match from the reference lab. The difference in that is that not only am I paying for a unit of blood, I've got to pay for the testing that they perform. I've got courier fees I've got to pay for, and we're trying to, that's where we're trying to chip away on that amount of money that we're spending is associated with all that travel, courier services, and turnaround time. One thing that you can do now is we're in the middle of validating at the moment is doing antigen typing on the Vision. And one of our goals is to build a in-house library of antigen tested units that we have at the ready. So if you think about how our current process is for finding an antigen negative unit, my patient comes in, we run that type and screen, we get that positive antibody panel, we identify the antibody, and then we will have to go through our inventory and either manually pull segs and test those units for the corresponding antigen, result those in the LIS, perform the AHG cross-match, and then allocate the units for those patients. In some cases, depending on what the workload looks like at that moment in time, we may refer this off to the reference laboratory and ask them to do all that work for us. And that includes, then you add to all that other stuff, you got to worry about getting in your couriers got to be set up and brought in for that. So what we're hoping to do now with the antigen typing is to get those units ready for us so that when we identify that antibody, then we can just go to our inventory, take the unit off the shelf, and actually do the AHG cross-match, eliminating all that extra work about arranging couriers and all that. What I didn't say is that you can also do AHG cross-matching on the Vision, which is another streamlining process for us.
All right. At your sites without seasoned blood bankers, do you have a policy of Ortho Connect review prior to that site sending to an IRL, particularly your Montana sites that must be remote?
Yeah, so what we have, we built the rules in Ortho Connect for the QC review and OC review. We standardize them across all the sites so that when the result comes over, there's analytical validation or biotechnical validation. Analytical validation in Ortho Connect is truly associated with a lot number quality control issue. So if you have quality control that has not been performed or has not been performed on that particular lot number of reagents, that result will be held in the Ortho Connect for analytical validation, and it will have to be manually released from there. And for biotechnical validation, we have anything that we consider an abnormal result. So a positive DAT, a positive antibody screen will be held there, requiring manual release. What we can do with Ortho Connect is you can identify who can release that kind of result in the system. We are currently have it that everyone at the same level of control, but you can restrict it and say if you have MLSs and maybe a mix of lab assistants or MLTs, and you don't want that positive antibody screen being released to your LIS, you can define technician access in Ortho Connect and only leave that to a higher level of supervisor who can release that result.
So regarding lab assistants, how do you handle history checks and labeling checks with having the lab assistants load the analyzer? Are they doing that portion?
So when our lab assistants load the analyzer, their restriction is primarily to be able to load the analyzer, and it goes from there. The panels and testing that we have written into our LIS requires fields as part of the type and screen will be a history check that's got to be resulted and performed that way. That still falls on our MLSs and cannot be performed by our lab assistants because they don't have access to that portion of the LIS or to Ortho Connect for that piece also.
Okay. How did you overcome staff resistance to change?
That was a challenge. We had several of our technicians that have long-term associates, and when I say long-term, I'm talking 30s, 40-year employees, and they were probably the biggest challenging group to bring along. The newer technicians who are, when I say newer, I'm talking about somebody who's graduated from their programs in maybe the last 10 years or so, who are more used to automation, auto-releasing of results, auto-filing of results, were easier to bring along on this. The other technicians who had not seen such automated results in computer systems were a little bit, for them, understandably gun-shy of letting the computer think for them. But as we were always in the room working with our team, showing them what they can do, showing them the next little tidbit to spark their curiosity, we had several of these newer techs come along, and as their enthusiasm grew, they brought the rest of the group along. Now, I will admit there was one person that, she was a 38-year employee, and she just never came along, and she did give us a retirement date, so we kind of waited her out, but eventually we would have had to have get her going.
You mentioned auto-releasing of results. Can you expand on that? Are there any checks and balances in place, and if so, what are they?
So as far as the auto-releasing of results, what happens for us is that we're using Sunquest as our LIS, and those results, our old workflow before switching over to Ortho was that we had to manually release the results from the analyzer to go to our LIS. And that was, figuratively, imagine your tech is getting up all day long. They have to get up from their workstation, walk over to the analyzer, view the results, release it, and then those results will then go to the LIS. Now what they can do is, because of the way the rules are set up, if everything passes on the Vision, everything passes on Ortho Connect, it releases directly to the LIS, and then the technician can just sit at their bench and they can review that result as it comes into the LIS. We're not doing auto-filing in the sense of what you may see in chemistry, where that glucose is filed and it's automatically in the chart and viewable at that time. There is still a second step where the technician has to view the result and load it into the patient file and complete the work at their point. But it is a lot more streamlined process for us, where we don't have to have the technician constantly getting up and walking across the room to the analyzer and releasing the results from there, and then going back to their bench and completing that LIS release also.
Okay. How many visions do you have at each site?
We have 8 hospitals. Each one has 1 vision, and actually one of our larger hospitals, who's more remote on the western part of Colorado, has 2 visions, and they have basically an AM and a PM vision. And they also, this site also has a donor collection center, so that's the other reason why they have 2 visions out there, to help support that overall workload.
Regarding training, how many hours per tech would you say it took to train for the Ortho Connect piece, and what type of competency testing was involved?
We've changed it up a bit since we started. When we did first start with the Ortho Connect, we did Ortho Connect and the visions at the same time, so each technician did a full 8 hours of training on both of those as we were bringing them up. What we found now at this time is we have been able to take the Ortho Connect piece and shorten it up to maybe half of a day, even a little bit less. And we're able to allow them to go into the testing environment, which is we have Ortho Connect we call production and test. So test allows somebody who is learning and training what they're doing to actually use Ortho Connect, play in the environment, learn about it on their own. So they have a lot of freedom in their current training process to work and do things in this training environment, which won't actually, which allows them to learn it without having to do anything risky by accidentally releasing the wrong result to a patient chart or something like that. So we've shortened it up a little bit and changed it up. Instead of doing it all in one day, we may teach the vision on one day and then the Ortho Connect piece on another day, just to do that. There's also some online training that you can do through Ortho that we ask the people to go online and complete that training from there also.
Okay, good. What is your experience with select cell panels?
So what we do with our panels, we have moved antibody identification to the vision. Obviously, if you're familiar with anything like panels themselves, you get a result off the vision. You don't necessarily get the actual interpretation. You still have to do that by the staff member has to do that. But what you can do is we're very commonly use the RH immune globulin select panel, which I believe is a cell 5, 6, 7, and 8. We can load that on the vision and just pull those cells off. We can also have our vision, we have a program that we can pull other select cells if we wanted to do if we're working on a rule-out panel. We found this, again, as a very huge benefit to us, particularly with the select panels for the Rh immune globulin, as we seem to get a lot of positives from recent immunizations. What we talked about earlier in the slideshow was that as part of our larger goal, we're trying to bring outpatient work that we were sending out to a competitor lab back into our own facilities. And because of that, we have found that we're getting more outpatient type of screens, prenatal panels, and those tests are coming in. We're seeing more and more of these panels. So it's a great way for us to, again, automate something and allow our technicians to be able to focus on other things.
So would you say that you're performing? Would you say that you're performing more of that, the testing that you would have sent out in-house now?
Definitely on the more complicated panels, but what we're seeing is that because the technicians can put this work on the vision, that it's just freeing them up from other things that they're doing. There's a lot of work involved when you're sitting at the bench and you have to do a panel manually. You've got to make that cell suspension. You've got to dilute the cell suspension. You've got to pipette it into the cards. You've got to load it into the incubator, centrifuge the cards, and then you get your reading. Right now, when it comes down to having one of these panels, we can just load it on the vision, sit select, save and go, and the testing is getting done. And that 30 minutes where that tech was sitting at the bench, babysitting this result from pipetting it to incubating it to centrifuging it, is now free to do something else. The other thing that we're seeing is a side benefit that we didn't really expect is that we're finding that the pipetting through the instrument is much more regulated. And we're finding that we're actually getting a little bit more out of our panels than we do in the past. Maybe we had technicians that double drops of cells in their testing, or maybe they went a little bit too heavy on their reactions. But regardless, what we're finding now is that the panels are lasting a little bit longer because I think we've got everybody now putting them on the vision, and because the vision does a very measured aspiration when it pipettes out, and we standardize that.
Okay, good. For the staff that were hesitant to or difficult to gain buy-in, have you seen an improvement since go live?
Yes. There's been a recent upgrade to the vision, which is going to allow us to do antigen typing on it. We're also looking at doing antibody titrations on the vision, and things that we currently have not yet doing. But when we see, when we come out to the technicians and we say, hey, you can do this new test, how about you guys want to consider doing antibody titers on the vision? They're all over it. I mean, I'm getting, my core team is very excited over what can the vision do for me next, you know. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of a bad side. They want it today, you know. No, we have to finish the validation plan. We've got it completed. We got the medical directors to sign off on it. You know, we got to get the procedure in place. Then you can do it. But you know, they heard antibody antigen typing on the vision, and they want, like, can we start tomorrow?
Is that the next set of testing that you plan to add to your lab, antigen typing?
Antigen typing is a big one because going back to that 6% of my budget going to the reference laboratory, I would say a good 15 to 20% of my costs are associated with just antigen typing of units. And that's just the raw part of it. You know, that doesn't include the time that's a little bit harder to measure. But yeah, we're very excited to get antigen typing on the vision and getting our units tested ahead of time.
Okay. Regarding assigning work minutes, if doing remote review, do you have a process to assign any work minutes to the site that is assisting the site performing the testing, making sure that the remote review site gets credit for the work that they're doing?
So currently, how we're doing that process is we are not measuring how much work is being done and transferring the costs over to the site that sends it over to us. We are, as we're moving forward with the reorganization and building a core laboratory, we're having conversations right now on how to capture that workload. So, for example, right now, we do have 4 laboratories in the Denver area that all belong to the same organization. Each hospital has their own laboratory. What we've been doing in the past is I may do a test here that somebody sends to me, and then they have a test that I'm not doing, I send to them. And when we've looked at that data in the past, it's pretty much equal as to who's picking up what sort of a workload, and we decided not to worry about trying to transfer costs. But as we move more to more of a core lab concept, some of these other laboratories are going to reduce what they're doing and send more to our laboratory at St. Joseph. And that is going to become more of an issue because it's going to be more weighted to one side of who's doing the work. And we actually started having those conversations a couple of weeks ago on how we're going to capture that data and see how to transfer off those costs.
Good. Following the topic of cost, did you have any difficulty justifying the purchase of the software to your organization? Were you able to model the cost savings well enough to convince them, or were they more motivated given your 5-year plan?
So when we did, we took this to our best practice team that I discussed earlier and how it was presented, what we can do with this, and how Ortho Connect can work for us. And, and at that time, there was our best knowledge of what we knew we could do with Ortho Connect. Since then, we've learned so much more, and they can actually do many more things for us. But in the short run, it really was a huge difference in savings. What we had to do was, so for Ortho Connect, we set it up on a central server, what we call our server farm, and everybody ties into that. Everybody's vision is pointing to that main computer. The main Ortho Connect computer is then interfaced to our LIS. So we had to just set up one interface in our LIS to verify, to communicate with Ortho Connect and do all the validation studies and testing on that. That was one interface. If we would have gone and taken all of the instruments as standalone, we would have had to buy 9 interfaces because we have 9 instruments. So right away, we're looking at 1/9 of the cost. When we just paid out the 2020 invoice for Ortho Connect and we separated the cost by site, I think each site paid, I think it was $379 each for 1 year's, their share of Ortho Connect. So we're talking huge difference in costs in what we were paying if we just went instrument directly to LIS.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. As a reminder to the participants, if you have any additional questions that you'd like to ask Mike, please enter them into the chat panel to all panelists. We still have a few more. You mentioned that your LIS is SunQuest. Can you share any lessons learned regarding the LIS interfacing?
Sure. We definitely needed to have everybody on board when we first turned on Ortho Connect. We needed to have our SunQuest person available. We need to have our own internal corporate LIS expert available for us. And Ortho, we're all either in the room or on a call together as we're moving things back and forth in trying to get everything up and going. we did have everything in place ahead of time that we needed, which was to ensure that the instrument network drops were installed and they were live and everything was set up to go with that. And having our team available who could check the data streams. We were using what's called wiretap to verify data was going back and forth. And just having everybody together in the same call, we set up what we would call a command center. And so once we got this data stream going across, then everything was good to go in regards to what do we learn, what do we need to know for the next instrument. But just like I said, we only had one interface going. So once we got the Ortho Connect and talked to our LIS, we were good for all 8 hospitals, and everything was from there. So we didn't have to go back on that part. In regards to having somebody from the lab, if you have somebody in your laboratory who is blood bank savvy as well as LIS savvy, that's going to be a plus for you, because what we found is that the LIS people certainly can check to see if data is coming over and what is the data stream looking like, but they needed somebody who was blood bank savvy and who at least could talk a little bit on their level to help in the process and say the data is coming over and it looks right or not looks right.
Okay, good. Having automation for testing in Ortho Connect for your data and results, what is the outcome for your patients? Could you improve your turnaround time and or accuracy of results delivered?
Yeah, so for our patients, having everything going through the instrument to Ortho Connect and to our LIS is a huge thing because of the fact that we obviously are going to reduce our potential for error by not having to manually enter those results into the computer and put something in incorrectly or pulling up the wrong patient file and entering results into that. Since everything is now being sent over through the LIS, we have data being checked as it's coming over and validating that we're in the right chart. So, you know, I think we mentioned, maybe I did mention how many tests we do a year, but we're looking at somewhere around 100,000 tests a year in our blood bank. And like I said, prior to going on Ortho, we had only done the typing screens as an automated test. So you're only talking 1/10 of our testing was being fully automated. And everything else is being put into the computer by hand. And in our LIS, just to enter the results of an ABO typing was something like 13 different keystrokes. So it's 13 different opportunities to put a reaction in wrong. Now, our LIS obviously is set up that if I put in a reaction pattern as an A pos and I try to put in a result of A neg, it will flag me. But there's a lot of steps involved, a lot of keystrokes, and all of that alone has potential to slow down our turnaround times as we're doing it manually. When it comes off of the vision and if it passes all of our rules that we've got set into place, it'll automatically drop over to our LIS, and then we can just load the result into the chart. And that's one keystroke, load result, click OK, and then hit save and verify. So a lot less on the keystrokes and a lot more accuracy in the fact that we don't have the risk of them putting in the wrong reaction pattern or getting into the wrong chart accidentally.
Definitely a decrease in risk there, so that's good. What final advice would you give if we'd want to adopt and implement automation for data management in our lab?
I would say one of the biggest things you have to have is you're going to need to have somebody who's going to be a champion to take the project on. If you're just saying we're buying something and here it is for the blood bank and they don't know what it can do for them and who's going to lead that implementation process, you're going to be working a little bit behind the power curve, having one hand tied behind your back. One thing I've learned with blood bankers is they're very attention to detail, and they're very concerned that, you know, what is this computer going to do for me? And they have to understand how it's going to work, and you have to show it to them. If you can do that, you'll be ahead of the game in regards to successfully implementing a computerized system like this.
Excellent advice. Thank you. We're now approaching the end of our time. As a final reminder, we've made a copy of the slides available. Please see the link in the chat box if you're interested. Mike, do you have any final thoughts before we close our session?
No, but, you know, if somebody were have any other questions that maybe they didn't get answered here and they wanted to any other feedback, I'm sure we could arrange through Lorraine or Ortho somehow to get that question over to us and we get it back out to you.
Absolutely. We can make arrangements for that. So thank you so much for sharing your experience today and answering the questions posed by today's audience. To our participants, thank you for taking the time to join us and for your questions in today's event. At Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, we never let ourselves forget how high the stakes are, which is why we never start working to deliver accurate test results, efficient and reliable instruments, easy-to-use technology, and continuous collaboration to ensure your lab is achieving the most important measure of success, exceptional patient care, because every test is a life. We look forward to partnering with you today and tomorrow. Stay healthy and safe.